Okay, so in this presentation, I'm going to share with you some of my personal thoughts about the patterns of U.S. apparel trade and resourcing and what to expect in year 2021. Um, if you follow the news or read some industry reports or talk to fashion companies, where I think two words still matters the most in 2021. One is COVID. We're still in pandemic, and I think this should be a medium to long term kind of factor that will affect our industry. And the second is trade policy. Well, something is great, always better than last year is we may see less headlines about trade. And all of a sudden you have a trade war or trade restriction. But still, trade policy, those behind the scene kind of, policy actions still will have an impact on apparel companies' sourcing and trade behavior. So first of all, and in terms of the impact of COVID, so here in this graph, once again, I compare the impact of the 2008 financial crisis versus the cumulative impact of COVID last year. And definitely, if you look at the difference between the blue and the red bar, the impact of COVID-19 on the volume of US apparel imports has been much, much bigger or much, much worse, okay? Um, you know, apparel is apparel is a buyer-driven industry. So if you want to know the patterns of trade, we definitely have to look at the patterns of consumption. So this data, this graph is based on data from the Census Bureau, and we can see starting from last May, U.S. consumers start to spend again. That being said, if you look at a graph, it's very clear. Kind of in the latest several months, like from October to December 2020, the patterns of consumption, became less stable. Just recall what happened in the U.S. I think the resurgence of COVID cases, especially the lockdown measures because of the rising COVID cases definitely have an impact on consumers' confidence or their behavior. Okay, and not surprising, and we can see the patterns of U.S. apparel imports kind of mirror the patterns of apparel consumption. Again, before the last quarter, kind of we had a V-shaped recovery. However, in the most recent month, especially in December 2020, we see more uncertainty out there, and here in this graph, I try to compare the recovery process of U.S. apparel imports during the 2008 financial crisis versus COVID last year. And we can see, two things. One is before December 2020, the recovery process during the COVID was very robust. Or put it this way, somehow I think, it's different. It's different from COVID. I mean, it's different from 2008 financial crisis when the U.S. economy itself was in some big trouble. But this time, I think the U.S. economy overall is kind of healthy, just because of those lockdown measures. The economy or business cannot resume its normal operation. So this is why it's kind of started from a much lower kind of level to recover, but the recovery process before December has been more robust. However, second is still the uncertainty. As you can see, in December 2020, the growth rate kind of dropped once again. And it's really hard, and it's really hard to predict what might happen next. So personally, I think there's hope here, but still uncertainty still is there as well. Okay. All right. So talking about the total volume, now let's look at from where U.S. companies are sourcing their apparel products. Several trends to watch. One is, I think, if you look at the market share, Asian countries as a whole remains the dominant sourcing base for U.S. fashion companies. So, China's market share is declining, However, sourcing orders are moving from China to China's competitors in Asia, like ASEAN members, which includes Vietnam and also Bangladesh. Their market share has been rising steadily. So how to explain this pattern? If you follow the news, and you may notice there has been some discussion, not only about let's reduce sourcing from China, but is there any way we can even reduce sourcing from Asia? Okay, but somehow I think it's challenging to do so. Why? On this graph, I just draw some tables. Draw some bars based on the results from our 2020 U.S. fashion industry benchmarking study, which I conducted in collaboration with the U.S. Fashion Industry Association. So we had a chance to talk to some of the largest U.S. fashion brands and retailers to invite them to provide their assessment about the competitiveness of some leading apparel sourcing bases against the key sourcing criteria. So here you can see on average, Asian countries, they really stood out in two factors. One is sourcing cost, and the other is flexibility and agility. Personally, I think these two factors actually are the most relevant during COVID. Why? Just think about it. Sourcing cost. Both U.S. consumers and also companies are facing unprecedented financial pressure this year, or starting from 2020, right? So of course, they are more price sensitive, or they have to try their best to reduce the sourcing cost as much as possible. So definitely Asian suppliers will demonstrate unique competitiveness. And also, during COVID, the supply chain, the sourcing process, can easily be disrupted. Shortage of raw material, shortage of labor, the port is closed. So definitely, we need to be nimble. We need to be flexible. And this is also something Asian suppliers have a lot of advantages, okay? All right, so talking about Asia, we cannot ignore China, which remains the largest source of apparel, or the largest supplier of apparel to the US market. That being said, I think interpreting the prospect of China as an apparel sourcing base for US fashion companies is becoming more and more challenging. Sometimes I feel China is becoming more and more mysterious to interpret. Just look at this graph, right? How to interpret this graph. Okay, well, definitely starting from May 2020, China's market share, both in quantity and in value, started to recover. However, starting from August 2020, for the straight 3 to 4 months, China's market share has been declining, has been dropping. So what will come next? All right. I have some, personal comments, just for your reference. The first comment is, economically, if we just focus on those economic factors, still, I think it makes sense to source apparel from China. Why is that? Well, even just for this graph, and you can see, at this point, still more than 20% of U.S. apparel imports in value, and nearly more than one third of U.S. apparel imports in quantity came from China. So where is the alternative? Can you find another supplier that is, that can fulfill China's role in sourcing? It's very hard to do that. And also, on this graph, in this graph, I collected some data. It's the market data, which shows the number of SKU products newly launched to the market from March 2020 to January 2021. So you can see China not only can offer a very huge sourcing volume, but also can offer the most variety kind of choices to U.S. fashion companies. Okay, and I think this is very, very important during COVID. Why? Just like in our daily life, for a variety kinds of reasons. In the past, we may shop 5 different supermarkets to go grocery each week, but now we can only visit one. So which one you will choose? Of course, the one that can offer the most variety kind of choices, and also maybe offer them kind of best price. And this is China. Okay, China's volume is still large, and China can fulfill almost any order in any quantity. Okay. Um, and likewise, in terms of, if you source from China, you also don't have to worry too much about the supply of textile raw material. We still recall, in January to February 20, in January and February 2020, when COVID initially broke out in China. Yeah, I know, U.S. fashion companies want to move their sourcing orders to Vietnam, to Bangladesh, but all of a sudden they realize, those fabrics, those yarns, okay, used by garment factories in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, they relied on supply from China. Okay, and this is the case. So if you source from China, you have to. There's no need to worry too much about the supply of textile raw material. However, if you source from Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, you name it, these apparel exporting countries in Asia that rely on imported textiles, and many of these textiles come from China these days. Okay. And also, I think, seeing the big picture is very important. Recall in the first graph I show you, starting from August 2020, China's market share in the US has been declining. However, if you look at the kind of time series data, and you will notice usually the US companies import most of the products from China from June to September. This is kind of the peak period. However, afterwards, actually, always, U.S. companies source relatively less products from China. And you can see in the recent 3 to 4 years, China actually lost more market share from 2018 to 2019. That's because of the tariff war. Tranche 4 products was launched or was announced in December 2018. So this is the reason why China's market share all of a sudden dropped. However, if you see the market share changes between December 2019 and December 2020, actually it's not that much. I'll put it this way, I think the impact of trade war actually has been much bigger than COVID. COVID itself probably will give some unique advantages to Chinese suppliers, okay? That being said, the second point is, still, for variety kinds of reasons, from the supply chain risk to the trade war, U.S. companies are gradually reducing their China exposure. Okay, I do remember, like say, last October, some news reports saying, U.S. companies are moving sourcing orders from India to China. However, I personally did not see this to be a long-term trend. Okay, if you look at those numbers I calculated, don't be scared by these numbers. Just put it this way: whenever I include China-India analysis, okay, the results will tell me, okay, U.S. companies are diversifying their sourcing base. However, if I exclude China from the analysis, and then the results will tell me, okay, U.S. companies are concentrating or they're sourcing more from China's competitors in Asia. So this is the trend, okay? And the third point is, if you follow the news, we know there are also some concerns about forced labor in Xinjiang, China. I don't want to get too much in politics, but just put it this way, these non-economic factors seems to have a huge impact on sourcing from China. Just look at this graph. For cotton apparel products, China's market share has dropped to an unprecedented 15% in 2020, much lower than non-cotton products. This is not something like a coincidence. Definitely those non-economic factors that those withhold release orders are having an impact here. So do not underestimate the impact of non-economic factors. Okay, so this is my personal prediction for China's prospect as an apparel sourcing base. Right, so the next topic I think is also very popular, near sourcing. Okay, from this graph, it looks like near sourcing is coming back, right? Those apparel imports from from the Western Hemisphere, significantly increased from only 7 or 8% to nearly 20%. However, once again, I think seeing the big picture is very, very important. If you look at what has happened in the past 5 or 6 years, you can see U.S. apparel imports from the Western Hemisphere also follows a seasonal pattern. Okay, right. Why we source products from Western Hemisphere, because of their advantage in speed to market. And usually, we need to source more such products when we approach holidays, right? Like, in November, in December, it's very likely, retailers, fashion brands, they want to fulfill the holiday orders, speed to market, so they choose to source such products from Western Hemisphere. So it's always the case. Okay, Western Hemisphere will account for relatively high market share close to the end of the year. But still, if you compare the market share in December 2019 to December 2020, it's not that much increase. Even though from a previous graph, we see such a dramatic increase, however, we have to realize there's a seasonal factor out there. And also, if you look at the whole year data, and actually, the data suggests the U.S. import less products from the Western Hemisphere in 2020. And in particular, when we look at the sourcing, both in quantity and in value, from two major free trade agreement areas in the region, USMCA, or previously NAFTA, and CAFTA-DR. And actually, there's no clear evidence that suggests more Western Hemisphere sourcing. Now, maybe I'm very lonely, but just based on the data, I do not see near sourcing is coming back in a large scale. Why is that? Is there any explanations for the trend? Still, I think, we have to think about why companies source from Western Hemisphere. What are those advantages? And also, what are those disadvantages? The advantages is speed to market. However, somehow I don't see speed to market is particularly important during COVID. Rather, I think there are two disadvantages when you source products from Western Hemisphere. One is price. Price is much higher. So this is the retail data. We can see the average price of U.S. products imported from Mexico actually has been much higher than those similar products imported from Asia. Okay, and the second is the variety of kinds of products we can source from Western Hemisphere. So in this graph, we can see, what kind of products you typically import from China, from Vietnam, Bangladesh. China and Vietnam, very kind of diversified. Almost any products you can source from these two places. Bangladesh, is relatively less diversified, but still it's okay. However, 87%, 86% of U.S. apparel imports from Mexico are in the categories of tops, right? But we need more than just tops in our daily life. Likewise, if you look at what kind of products U.S. imports from CAFTA members from Haiti, still 57% are tops and 24% are bottoms. So it's very narrowly defined. Okay, we need more diversification in terms of, putting this way, we cannot source more than just tops and bottoms from these regions. Okay, so this is why near sourcing have its bottlenecks out there. Okay, and just say, just one more quick point about Western Hemisphere or near sourcing. So this is actually how Western Hemisphere supply chain or near sourcing works. So there are two types of players. One is the United States, which plays the role as the textile exporter. Okay, so U.S. export textile and fabrics, textiles like yarn and fabrics to Mexico and Central American countries. And then these countries, cut and sew clothing and shipped it, the finished garments, back to the U.S. duty free. Okay, so this is so-called Western Hemisphere supply chain. However, if you look at the trade data, somehow I feel I'm very concerned. Why? Look at the green line. So theoretically, garment factories in Western Hemisphere should use textiles also from Western Hemisphere, also from the region. However, the green line suggests this percentage is declining. So increasingly, garment factories in the Western Hemisphere, they're sourcing textiles from outside of the region. Okay, this trend is very different from if you look at the trend in Asia. So Asian countries are increasingly using more textiles from within Asia, but for Western Hemisphere countries, it's totally the different. Likewise, for apparel, okay, again, for countries like US, Canada, okay, so they increasingly also import less apparel from within the region. So putting it this way, the regional supply chain is not becoming more integrated in Western Hemisphere, but rather such a regional supply chain is facing tremendous pressures, is facing tremendous competition, especially from Asian countries, Why is that? I think more things can be studied for sure. This is my kind of personal thinking and still need to be verified. In the past, I think the traditional model, as I have explained earlier, is a garment factories, in Mexico. Okay, they probably are willing to use more expensive textiles from the U.S. in exchange for the duty-free market access, to the U.S. Okay, by leveraging or by claiming the benefits provided by USMCA or NAFTA. Okay, so this is the traditional model. However, these days, because of the reaching of some major free trade agreements in the Asia Pacific region, garment factories in the Western Hemisphere or fashion brands and retailers in the Western Hemisphere, they have more options than before. For example, why not let's change a way of thinking? Why not let's try to save more money from the textile side? Remember, for a finished garment, the 60% of the production costs come from the material, from the textiles. So why not let's save more money from the textile side by taking advantage of trade agreements like CPTPP, the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the very recently reached RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive and Economic Partnership. And even though I may have to pay tariff for the finished products, but maybe the savings from the textile side will still help me to reduce the total sourcing or production cost. Okay, so those competition from from offering companies more options to choose which free trade agreement to use may explain why the Western Hemisphere supply chain is facing more competitions. Okay. Right, so let me just wrap up what I just mentioned. So several trends we can watch in 2021. One is, I think, U.S. apparel imports hopefully will continue to rebound. However, I think uncertainty still is there. It still may create some some kind of fluctuations. So do not simply forget about the uncertainty. But overall trend, I think, is is hopeful. Okay, and the second, I think, if you look at from where companies will source their products, I think Asian countries as a whole will remain the dominant apparel sourcing base. Okay, and U.S. companies are not totally giving up sourcing from China. However, if you look at the overall trend, still, companies are trying to reduce their China exposure, especially because of non-economic factors. Near sourcing, I think, will remain a very hot topic in 2021, but whether companies are actually sourcing more from the region, there's a question mark here. Okay, and last but not least, I think it's worthwhile for fashion companies to watch what's happening with RCEP, what's happening with CPTPP, because I think these new mega free trade agreements in Asia Pacific region will also shape new supply chain or sourcing models for fashion companies. All right, so that concludes my presentation. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions or have any different views.